He's been interested in nuclear arms control for a long time, since the late 1980s, when apparently he offered, when he was a real estate developer, offered to the Reagan administration to negotiate an arms control agreement. So there is some hope that he may want to reach a deal with Russia or China or Iran or North Korea. I'm Steve Fetter. I'm a professor at the University of Maryland. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists was created in 1947 by former Manhattan Project scientists, and as a symbol of the risk of nuclear weapons, the risk of catastrophe to humanity, they created the Doomsday Clock as a way to symbolize how close humanity was to a nuclear catastrophe. And it's been maintained, and it has been adjusted. It's gone forward. As risks have increased, it's gone away from midnight as risks have decreased over the last nearly 80 years. I'm a member of the Science and Security Board, which is about 20 people with expertise across a wide range of fields, including nuclear weapons, climate change, biological threats, the threats of other disruptive technologies like artificial intelligence. And we meet twice a year. We meet in the middle of the year. We meet toward the end of the year to assess, have the risks increased or decreased? What are the main risks? And we use that as a basis for setting the clock each year. We also hear during the year from experts on particularly new and urgent threats. So, for example, the latest developments in artificial technology or in the development of new biological organisms that could pose threats. And we have a discussion. We ask in each of these areas, nuclear risk, climate, biological risk, disruptive technologies, we ask one of our members to write a briefing paper that summarizes what are the main trends. We review those and discuss and debate them among ourselves and come to a consensus about whether the risks have significantly increased over the previous year and compared to this whole period when we've been setting the clock. Well, it's not so much that there was a dramatic development in the last year, but the continuation of trends that were very disturbing. And it seems that no matter where one looks around the world, these risks are increasing. I focus personally a lot on nuclear risk, and there we have the continuing war with Russia and the threats that President Putin has made several times to escalate to the use of nuclear weapons should he not get his way. We have the buildup of arms in China, of nuclear weapons in China, without any clear limit to that, and the tensions between the United States and China over Taiwan, the continuing building of nuclear weapons and long-range missiles by North Korea, the continuation of Iran's nuclear program, its program to enrich uranium, and the possibility that they may move to develop nuclear weapons. So everywhere one looks in the nuclear domain, risks are increasing. In the area of climate change, the bad news is that last year was the warmest year on record by far, and that emissions of greenhouse gases continued to increase. The good news is that the deployment of renewable energy, also of carbon-free energy, also increased dramatically. But still, there's grave reasons to be concerned about climate change. There's also reasons to be worried about the emergence of new biological threats, the bird flu, for example, the possibility that that could become transmissible among humans, and developments in the intersection between artificial technology and biotechnology that could allow the creation of novel biological threats. So all of these things together indicated to us that the risk of catastrophe was increasing, but there is still a lot of uncertainty, particularly about how the new Trump administration would approach many of these, in particular, nuclear risks. The president does see himself, I think, as a deal maker. And he's been interested in nuclear arms control for a long time, since the late 1980s, when apparently he offered, when he was a real estate developer, offered to the Reagan administration to negotiate an arms control agreement. So there is some hope that he may want to reach a deal with Russia or China or Iran or North Korea, as he in his last administration did try to achieve a deal. It was ultimately unsuccessful with North Korea. So there's still a lot of uncertainty about how this year will unfold. I like to remain optimistic and hopeful. I don't know that it's a high probability, but I do think that President Trump wants to be known and recognized as a successful president, maybe even a great president, one of the greatest presidents. And to do that, he has to have major accomplishments. And he's spoken several times about President Obama's Nobel Peace Prize and the fact that he thinks he should deserve a Nobel Peace Prize. Well, the way you get a Nobel Peace Prize is by achieving some major agreement or advance that advances international peace and security. And I think there are plenty of opportunities to do that. An end to the war in Ukraine on terms that are good for Ukraine, that preserve Ukraine's sovereignty. A deal, I think, is possible with Iran. And one of the unique things about President Trump's status is he may be the only American president that could achieve an agreement that would be ratified by the U.S. Senate, because that requires 2/3 of all senators to vote for it. And President Trump could count on the support of many Republicans in ratifying a treaty should he achieve it. So I think Iran is a particularly promising case, because Iran's position in the Middle East has now been weakened, and they may be looking for an opportunity to reach an agreement with the United States that would allow a lifting of sanctions in exchange for a curtailing of their uranium enrichment program. So I think that's one opportunity. Russia's another, China another opportunity to reach agreements and understandings that would reduce the risk of nuclear catastrophe. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a fairly short-lived crisis. It occurred over a period of a few weeks, and the clock was not reset until after the crisis had ended. And in fact, following the Cuban Missile Crisis, that was a sort of wake-up call for Russia and the United States, having come so close to catastrophe, to reach agreements that would reduce nuclear risk. And in fact, that the Cuban Missile Crisis was followed very quickly by some agreements, one to establish a hotline, another to end the atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons, and then fairly soon after, formal negotiations between the United States and the Soviet Union. So I think that the clock setting at that time really reflected this realization of the possibility of a nuclear disaster that was presented by the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the need to move away from that. I would also say, though, today, of course, nuclear weapons are not the only threat to humanity. Climate change is certainly a potent threat, one that humanity has not adequately addressed, and that was not on anyone's radar in the 1960s. Biotechnology has advanced tremendously. Our ability to manipulate it, to create new risks, our vulnerability to pandemics is greater today. And of course, the other disruptive technologies like artificial intelligence and the fear that those could present unforeseen risks to humanity, that is new. So I would say, compared to maybe the 1960s, the fact that the minute hand is closer to midnight is more reflective of the number of threats, and also our ability to handle those in an intelligent way. There's been a tremendous disruption of the information environment In the 1960s, there were lots of newspapers and news networks that really focused on delivering objective facts. And today we have people getting their news from sources that are unreliable. And worse than that, we have people in governments and organizations that are trying to distort information, making it more difficult for governments to address these threats to humanity in an intelligent way. In the case of climate change, we may have turned a corner in just the last few years where our ability to address it and our willingness to reduce greenhouse gas emissions may not depend so much on the policies of governments or the predilections of a particular president, because it will now be driven by economics. In most places in the world, wind and solar are now the least expensive sources of electricity, and they're the fastest growing all over the world. So I'm hopeful that market forces will simply take it forward from this point. And the same thing for vehicles. We're close to coming to the point where electric vehicles will be less expensive, not just on a life cycle basis, but on a purchase basis, and will have ranges that are comparable to those of gasoline vehicles. And there will be charging infrastructure built out throughout the United States and other countries. And so consumers will choose the climate-friendly solution because it's the most sensible, the most economical, and we won't depend on President Trump thinking that an electric car is a good or a bad thing, or a windmill, a wind turbine is a good or bad thing. People will buy them because they're simply the best solution. Well, I think on the nuclear front, any agreement between the nuclear powers that would reduce the risk of nuclear use. And as I say, there are opportunities all across the world to do that, an end to the war in Ukraine on terms that were acceptable to Ukraine and reassured U.S. allies that Russia would not present a threat to their independence and sovereignty. On the climate front, I hope we are approaching the point where carbon emissions peak and begin to decrease. That will be a great moment to celebrate when we begin to go down the other side of the slope and actually begin to phase out the use of fossil fuels and see emissions begin to decline. And in disruptive technologies, if we see agreements between governments to adopt oversight and regulation that would try to get ahead and anticipate potential risks, would try to ensure that artificial intelligence is not used in situations where it could present a unexpected and inadvertent harm to humanity. So because there are all these dangers, there are also all the opportunities to confront the dangers. Humans created all of these things: nuclear weapons, the burning of fossil fuel, biotechnology, artificial intelligence. Humans created them. Humans can control them.